Welcome or welcome back to the Bacon Immigration Law and Policy series. This is the 6th talk in these 2 semesters, and I, for one, am really looking forward to it. It's our first talk about grassroots activism. So welcome to Zaira Livier. And the title of the talk is The Fight for Humane Immigration Policies, What We've Learned Working for Sanctuary. Elizabeth, or Lizzie Hanna, is going to introduce our speaker. We've had great participation from the immigration law students and attendants, and thank you all for that. And I also, before we get going, want to take this opportunity to thank Carol Lee, who is the administrator, Carol Lee Taylor, who is the administrator who has been doing all the behind the scenes work to get these talks organized, get the flyers printed, get them out and redistributed, get all the links out to people. And it's been a lot of work that's on top of all the work that she does for many different clinics. And she has not complained at all. In fact, she has embraced it. And so if you can just put your hands together in whatever way you want to do that on Zoom for Carol Lee, you're awesome.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's my pleasure.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lizzie.
Thanks, Professor Marcus. Like Professor Marcus said, my name's Lizzie. I'm a 1L in the Immigration Law Students Association, and I'm really excited to see so many folks here today and to introduce our speaker. Just a quick note, if you have, so we're gonna do a format that's about half speaking and hopefully ample time, about 30 minutes for Q&A at the end. We have until 1:15. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to hold them until the end and raise your hand with the raised hand feature and I will call on you, or you can go ahead and put them in the chat or directly message them to me and I will read them out on your behalf. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker and give you a little information about her. Zaira Livier is a Mexican-born human rights activist, writer, storyteller, and abolitionist who currently serves as the executive director for the People's Defense Initiative here in Tucson, a grassroots anti-capitalist organization that she founded in 2018 as a community defense front against repressive policies and structures. In line with their Sanctuary for All mission, the PDI Collective has led campaigns and programs, including the Tucson Sanctuary Initiative, Feeding Those Who Feed Us, and the Tucson Tenants Union. Previously, Zaira organized with Lupe Tucson and Jobs with Justice along the intersection of migrant rights and labor. She and her 8-year-old are both avid hikers. She used to teach bartending at the Academy of Tucson, and she does wigs and makeup at the Arizona Opera on a seasonal basis, which is very cool. So thank you, Zaira, for being here. I've sort of heard about your work from afar, and I'm really excited to hear about it from you and to learn from you today.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Lizzie and Lynn and Carol, for working with me. I'm glad that we were able to reschedule this, and sorry for the last time I had a hiking accident and I had a terrible concussion. It was awful, but I think I was due for it. So I'm gonna share my screen with folks. I'm sorry to be that person, but I am a visual person. Let's see if I can actually find it. All right. All right, so again, my name is Zaira. I'm the executive director for People's Defense Initiative, which I'll just call PDI from now on. It's much easier and much shorter. A little bit about myself, because I think it's really important to the conversation. I think this is a really, really key and interesting standalone kind of case in policy and in grassroots work and in just sanctuary work in general. as was mentioned, I'm from Mexico. I was born there. I came to the United States when I was about 7 years old. My mom brought myself and my brother through the border. I've got a very personal relationship to that border wall. We were undocumented. We crossed illegally with a coyote, with the help of a coyote. We went under that fence. We went over that fence. We were caught repeatedly. This is back in the day where Operation Streamline wasn't a thing, where they'd catch you, and the worst that would happen is you'd spend a couple of hours in the back of a border patrol vehicle. So our crossing, basically, from what I remember, was a 2-day journey of going back and forth, getting caught, and it just not working. And my tia, my mom's sister, who was a U.S. citizen, because that is the nature of Mexicans from the borderlands in particular, that some of us were born on this side and some of us were born on the other side, came up with the idea that we will just cross walking. She'd teach us to say U.S. citizen. They dress us very cutely and we'd walk through as if we belonged, after trying many other ways, running, again, very terrifying ways for a small child in particular. And we did that. And I remember exactly how I was dressed. I remember I was holding a juice box, and I walked in and I told the customs agent, U.S. citizen, and they let us right in. And I've been here ever since. We settled in the south side of Tucson, my mother, my brother, and myself with our tia. And my mom had to go back to Mexico. She couldn't find work. It was difficult. So my brother and I were here by ourselves for some time with our tia as undocumented children, pretending our tia was our aunt. Our tia, which is aunt for those that don't know, was our mother, so we can go to school. And it was just this terrifying experience for us, going from Querétaro, where we're from, this different culture, to this place where we had to lie about who we were, where we were told to be scared of police, where we were told to be as invisible as we possibly can and say nothing about ourselves. So this is a childhood of walking home from school and seeing a Border Patrol agent car and hiding in the desert when we were tiny, tiny children. I actually finally became a US citizen in 2018. Which is, oddly enough, the same year that we filed this initiative, just a few months later. So special also in the sense that the very first Sanctuary City initiative in the entire nation had a chairperson who had themselves been undocumented and were going to be able to vote for the very first time in their lives on this initiative, the first year ever. Also interesting. My mother just became a citizen this year after, 30 years in the United States. And my brother actually, unfortunately, was deported years ago, and he was murdered back in our hometown. So I say this because we're going to be discussing things that seem very trivial, but these are actually very important. And I think it's quite important to understand the experience of the migrant experience, where one of us is here filing a petition to put this initiative on the ballot, and running a nonprofit and doing all of these things, while my other half, my brother, was deported and his life was in danger all the time. So that's a little bit about myself. Now we're going to talk a little bit about PDI, so People's Defense Initiative. Okay, so PDI, we are a grassroots anti-capitalist collective fighting for the defense of human rights in Southern Arizona. Our mission is to advance an intersectional movement that challenges structural oppression, exploitation, and the criminalization of poverty. Our core values, I'll go through them very quickly, are first and foremost respecting Indigenous sovereignty, We recognize that we're occupying the ancestral lands of the Anautum. Solidarity, which is key to everything that we do. Racial and socioeconomic justice, women's liberation, housing as a human right, LGBTQA and gender equality, and of course, sustainability. Now, what did that mean in action? So when I was I was approached by the co-founder, who is a close friend of mine, Joel Feynman, who is also the Pima County public defender. When we had the conversation about PDI, he came to me with the idea of let's do something. And he didn't know what that something was. We just knew that we were both exhausted. This was in 2017. After 2016, my community, and as a migrant, we've been ravaged by the Trump administration in so many ways. I've been organizing on a grassroots level with Lupe Tucson, Jobs for Justice, endlessly protests for sanctuary city policies. We were hosting conversations constantly, mobilizing the community against these attacks. I had documented friends who were going through the worst time in their lives, some of them suicidal. I mean, it was a very, very dark time, and we didn't feel that enough was being done. So we had this idea of starting a group, but I thought the last thing that Tucson needs is another nonprofit. We don't need another nonprofit. So what are we missing, and how can we fill that hole? And after I did an analysis and, with my friends and co-organizers, we really came to the conclusion that in Tucson, we've got this beautiful culture of grassroots work in a lot of the ways that say derechos humanos and many other groups the work that they do is indirect services, right? So it's about providing services to refugees and migrants once they get here or while they're crossing, and that's but we weren't pushing for policy changes, which is because we're behind in the times and in size, say compared to groups like we have in Phoenix, Puente, Poder, Lucha, that have built infrastructure and are out there building a large base, mobilizing their people and actually pushing for policy changes and really, really, really challenging the people that they have in charge. So we realized that it would be the hole that we could fill. And with that, what our mission and action would look like is we wanted to build and have, I believe, build a political home to advance the needs of our community by organizing around intersectional issues, building around a Tucson-based platform which addresses most pressing local issues while promoting values of liberation and community defense, which just means having conversation, having reading groups, having educational sessions and the like. Promoting community collaboration to build the necessary infrastructure to effectively translate social justice work into actual political power. What would that mean to build political power for those of us on the grassroots level doing this kind of work? Push for policies which ensure that our local government is committed to protecting and defending all of its residents, regardless of their immigration or socioeconomic status. In a second, we're going to discuss about the issues in Tucson. Create long-lasting and meaningful change to protect and uplift the most vulnerable members of our community. So we in PDI, our group, which was comprised of many different people, many different backgrounds, all community advocates, mothers, fathers, you name it, teachers, who asked ourselves when we got together, okay, what does a Tucson of the future for us look like? What would sanctuary for all mean? What would the best Tucson be? What could we change to make life better for most of us in Tucson? And what we did is we did a vision board, looked at, in 10 years, what would we want to see change? And we put everything down, minimum wage, healthcare, I mean, you name it, we had it all up there. And then we went backwards. And this was in 2018, founded in April of 2018. So these conversations we're having during that spring and summer. So almost 2 years after the election of Donald Trump. So what we landed on was sanctuary. We landed on sanctuary. Why sanctuary? It was the moment, right? As I mentioned, the migrant community, we were reeling and we were afraid. Our families were afraid. It was not a good time to be a person of color, and it was definitely not a good time to be a migrant then. It was just day after day of attack, right? You'd wake up and you didn't know what was new, and it was always shocking. And we understand that a lot of these things were not new. It was just so loud and so out there, and it emboldened so many nasty, terrible people. Those of us on the ground were constantly harassed when this was happening. I was getting death threats regularly. I was getting some of the nastiest threats I've ever gotten. And I've gotten a lot during my work as an organizer. So we said, you know what, sanctuary it is. Our first project's gonna be sanctuary. And it made sense. In Tucson, we've got 3 large pressing issues. We've got poverty. So I understand that Tucson is a liberal beacon and a democratic whatever. But the issues nonetheless persist that we have in the rest of the state. We've got a very, very, very high poverty rate, which goes hand in hand with mass criminalization. And of course, repressive immigration policies. We're 60 miles from the border. We've got occupation all around us. We've got 7 Border Patrol checkpoints now in or around Tucson, which means that if you're undocumented, you're stuck here, can't go anywhere. And of course, we've got SB 1070. So a little bit about poverty in Tucson, which some people are shocked to hear. I just checked the datausa.io website this morning, which takes a bunch of data from the federal government and local governments to tell us the daily poverty rate as well as other measurements that we want to know is at 23.5%, and it normally hovers anywhere from 24.5 to 23.5. The national average is 13%, just to give you a perspective on that. The unemployment rate right now is about 23.7%. This is a report that I always go back to. The 2018, the Stress Community Report said that 59% of the city's zip codes are in distress, with less than 8% being prosperous. And that means that the poverty is highly concentrated in zip codes that are predominantly minority, and those that are thriving are very white and they're very far away from us, right? As far as those in distress, 85714, 40% no high school diploma, 41% unemployment, 36% poverty rate, and that's a 50% of national income median and 92% minority in that zip code alone. And of course, I'm going to put the criminalization and immigration together because we understand that our local police, our Pima County police, and our state police all collaborate with Border Patrol and ICE because of SB 1070. So criminalization is important here. SB 1070, which is still in the books, was an expression of decades-long anti-immigrant sentiment and unfounded fears through, xenophobic, racist, and classist rhetoric of the right-wing Arizona legislators. And SB 1070 is what came out of that, as well as things like Prop 300 and the like. Since its passing, Arizona became ground zero for issues like mass incarceration, Operation Streamline, which we can discuss later, private prisons like CoreCivic and Geo Group, which not only have detention centers for undocumented people, but they actually have private prisons. My little brother is in prison right now in Red Rock, and it is a CoreCivic private prison. Police collaboration with ICE and Border Patrol, militarization, deportation, child detention, which we've got one here in Tucson in our city limits, and family separation that we saw under the Trump administration. Currently, as far as incarceration, we've got over 42,000 men and women that are locked away in Arizona prisons. Our state incarcerates 877 people per 100,000. That makes us the 8th highest per capita incarceration rate in the entire world. That's not just the United States, it's the entire world. Since 1996, here in Pima County, there's been a 261% per capita increase in the number of women being locked away in Pima County Jail. And this was under Barbara Lawal, who was in that seat for over 20 years, and she was a Democrat. She was a Democrat attorney, county attorney. The women we lock away are disproportionately women of color, overwhelmingly poor and low income, and they themselves, a large number, are survivors of domestic violence, trauma, and have high rates of physical and mental illness and substance abuse, as well as emotional, psychological, and generational family trauma. So when we settled on the Sanctuary City Initiative, which was actually called Tucson Families Free and Together, or Prop 205 to make it a little bit shorter, we thought to ourselves, this is the moment. If ever we can win something like this, it's now. You all remember the news back then. You all remember the child in cages. You all remember the drownings at the Rio Grande. You remember the atrocities that we were actually paying attention to, and the family separation, which was just absolutely devastating. So we thought, this is it, let's do it. And so not only address some of the issues that we just discussed, poverty, high incarceration rates, immigration, but the biggest thing that we wanted to do with the Sanctuary City Initiative is really send a message to our undocumented and migrant community here in Tucson that you're not expendable, that we want to protect you, that we want you here, and that we'll do what we can to protect you from the outside. And that was really a message that we were willing to die on the hill for. And every time that I was asked by a news anchor, are you trying to protect undocumented people? My answer was absolutely. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So the general idea was that, by writing this initiative, we'd tackle some of these issues. So what the initiative actually did in general, number one, prohibit city police officers and other city employees from detaining persons on the basis of a person's immigration status and from assisting in the enforcement of federal immigration laws, except in circumstances expressly required under state and federal law. So I'm not a lawyer, but some of you are and will be. And what was really exciting about this is that we took SB 1070 and we wrote a policy that was right around the edges of it. We squeezed it as much as we could. And we'll see what we did in a second. 2, prohibit certain collaborations between city agencies and the federal law enforcement agencies. 3, provide for certification of certain visas, U visas for immigrant crime victims of crimes who were migrants. And 4, provide for minimum record keeping and protocols for certain communications between city employees and federal law enforcement agencies. I was chair of a committee that we got out of the fight against Stone Garden for Pima County Sheriff's Department. And one of the things that we found is that they actually weren't keeping track of when our police officers were contacting Border Patrol. Often they didn't use the radio, they used their cell phones. So we understood that we needed to have transparency. So a little bit more detail, and some of you may remember this was in 2019. A lot of the opposition said that Tucson Police Department has what they call their general orders. They've got their general orders, and that the general orders were enough. So here is a side-by-side comparison of the two. So as you can see, our Tucson Families Free and Together initiative expanded the prohibition of profiling. They've got this, we had a lot more. Ability to speak English, mode of dress, because a lot of folks were being, stopped or questioned because they look like, workers, labor workers, construction workers, whatever, you'd confuse with somebody that might be undocumented. So we expanded sexual orientation, disability, economic status, familial or marital status. Our initiative also, cannot be modified. So unlike the general orders that can be tossed out of the window at any given moment, when we get a new chief of police or when the city council requests it, our initiative would not have been able to be changed unless it was taken back to the voters. So our initiative also prohibited cross-certification of federal agents as AC peace officers, which is a thing that happens. Using city resources to train federal agents, that's a way of certifying them as AC peace officers. So we didn't want them to use any of our money. They've got enough of their own. Tucson police from participating in state or federal law. So it would be a no on any of that. Enforcement task forces for the purpose or effect of the task force is the enforcement of federal civil immigration law. And ours also prevented officers from inquiring about immigration status. In schools, hospitals, churches, houses of worship, state or local court buildings, which is already something that I believe is in the orders for CBP, but we obviously know on the ground is not respected. So what SB 1070 does, still is basically if a police officer pulls you over or you come into contact with them at all, you call them, you interact with them at all, and just to reiterate, when you're an undocumented person, a child, anybody, our golden rule is to never, ever speak to police. That is the last thing that you do, understanding SB 1070, understanding that you're undocumented. I understood that as a child. So SB 1070 now makes a police officer in Arizona, if say you don't have an ID, if say something else gives them the impression that you might be undocumented. Oh geez, I wonder what it could possibly be, right? If you're blonde and blue-eyed and you speak English correctly and you don't have a driver's license when you're pulled over, I'm going to assume that the police officer is not going to then have an idea that you might be from Mexico. So we understood that to be the case. So we wrote in all of these factors. The officers should not take in race, color, ethnicity, mode of dress, ability to speak English, speech pattern, including accent, inability to provide permanent or local residential address, presence where aliens who are unlawfully present are known to gather, etc. Ours also required police to advise people that they are not obligated to answer questions about their immigration status. So our initiative would, if the police officer is to the point where he feels under SB 1070, he needs to question me on my immigration status, he first had to tell me that I had the right to remain silent. And then he had to give, and if I spoke, he had to give me a waiver that said that I was told that I had the right to remain silent. Very basic things to protect people's civil liberties and to keep them safe and at home with their family where they belong if they were undocumented. So just a little bit, we also had other provisions in here which we'll talk about, which we thought were super valuable. By speaking with community advocates on sexual violence and assault, we knew that sexual assault and violence is a huge problem that goes underreported with the undocumented community because police show up there and both parties are questioned. So we wrote in a provision that said, under the circumstances of domestic violence or sexual assault, Tucson police shall not ask any party on their documentation status. Again, that's wouldn't stop them from arresting anybody, wouldn't stop them from taking them to Pima County Jail or charging them. It would just be that immigration status is off of the table. And if I'm an undocumented victim of domestic violence or sexual assault, or my children are undocumented, I'm likely not to call the police. We also put in a provision for U visa. So U visa you get when you are a victim of some crime and you collaborate with police. They are to issue you a certification, and with that certification, you apply for a U visa, which gives you protection. We know, again, from talking to the community, understanding these things, that police normally take, months, 6 months to a year, sometimes never issuing that certification. So we had it so that once the victim applied for the certification, Tucson Police Department would have to give them that certification within 90 days. So sanctuary as good governance, right? Collaboration between local law enforcement and federal immigration agencies creates a dynamic that discourages a large segment of the population from reporting crime. And I think this is super important. Since 2007, and most notably after SB 1070, 40% of undocumented migrants fled Arizona. I don't think Arizona has yet to recover financially, let alone in other ways, after what happened with SB 1070. Those of us who remained here made our lives very small. We stopped going places. We stopped going to eat. We stopped driving. We pulled ourselves out of any social programs that we even were qualified for. We made our life as small as possible. Just driving was risking coming into contact with a police officer. And not to mention that kind of traumatic stress, the kind of stress that families live under. I have a friend of mine who's undocumented who, when he comes home and he doesn't see both of the cars of his parents in the driveway, he nearly has a heart attack because they are so adamant about going to work and coming back. And if anything like that changes, it's terrifying. That's traumatic. It's terrible. Discourages integration into our society. More numbers on, what sanctuary looks like in other places, less crime, higher wages for folks, all sorts of really good stuff happens. There's some reasons there why sanctuary, which I've already touched on. Extra perks, we engage the community with, a community-led initiative. We exercise our right to direct democracy as, just people. We were just people writing this thing, seeing what we could do. Uplifting the voice of our community, and more importantly for us, is creating our own narrative and being very, very, very honest about what we were doing. And I believe that we have changed the narrative around immigration, especially here in Tucson. And we were trying to assert our right as a city to self-governance. Now what we learned a whole lot. On the electoral spectrum, which is something that we kind of already knew, we learned that trust must be built. So we were asking folks to vote on an initiative that was sanctuary, knowing that sanctuary was a word that had been turned into something bad. And we wanted to take it back. We knew that it would be used, so we said, screw it, let's run with it, let's take it back. But nonetheless, trust has to be built. The base, the folks that we needed to come out and vote for this didn't know us from any other person, right? They only started hearing of us. What we needed is to have been knocking on their doors for several years. We needed to have built trust because these conversations are difficult. They're very difficult. What is sanctuary? What does that mean? What about criminals? What about that? All of this, the national rhetoric that sanctuary lets criminals go is so ingrained in us. So our community has to be engaged and education has to be at the forefront. So us as an organization, we've got to make sure that we do this and that we focus on this before we run another initiative ever again. We so this isn't necessarily a lesson that we learned, it's something that we know. We have to meet our base where they are. And our base is our community. It's the people that we want to engage. And that means having language that's accessible to them. That means being able to have these difficult conversations in ways that folks can understand them, and really being able to meet them where they are at work, at school, all of these different things. And of course, Tucson lacks real progressive infrastructure. I mentioned already before, Phoenix has this really beautiful, large coalition of organizations that are POC led, that do a lot of amazing work, but they've got years and years ahead of us of infrastructure building, of building base, of building that trust that I mentioned. We don't really have that here in Tucson. We have local elections with local leaders that knock on your door and ask you for your vote, and then that's it. We learned that police have a lot of political power in Tucson. This is so interesting. In 2017, Chief Magnus wrote an op-ed for the New York Times saying that sanctuary was the way to go. It was the most amazing thing, right? When it was politically convenient, of course, because Trump was in office back then. He made every talking point that we had in this op-ed. We had Regina Romero, who back then wasn't mayor yet, doing the same. Sanctuary this, sanctuary that, we're gonna protect ourselves against Trump, yada, yada. And then we filed our Sanctuary City Initiative, and the opposite was true. The exact opposite was true. We had police officers using the app Nextdoor to push some of the most vile, racist, and xenophobic things that you've ever heard. Exactly in the same breath, in the same tone as the Trump administration's rhetoric. It was exactly like that. We had Chief Magnus doing the exact same thing. And then suddenly we had Regina Romero running for mayor, who was suddenly anti-sanctuary. Yes, sanctuary, but not this sanctuary. And the Sanctuary Coalition was diverse. And so it included a lot of our so-called pro-sanctuary people when it was convenient to be so. And then all of your normal folks. Discount Tire, that some of us might know, were huge supporters of the Trump administration. Gaylord Hotels, big donor. They raised about $500,000 in about a week once they did polling that showed us that we had a chance. We had a real chance at winning. They outraised us 5-1. We only raised about $100,000. They overnight raised at least $500,000 that we know of. Jim Quick, of course, not a surprise there. And this one was a shocker for all of us. Chicanos por la Causa came out against us. After, from what we know, several calls from our Chicano leaders here in Tucson, Mayor Romero being one of them. They put in, I believe, $15,000 and wrote many op-eds claiming this to be a end all be all, it would end policing, it would release criminals, all of this wild stuff. Tucson Police, of course, and Steve Kasachik of Ward 5 was oddly enough ardently against us. He and I shared many spaces and many debates together. He was just very, 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 very against this initiative. Another one, and I'm using a couple of cliches, and I'm sorry about that. I know it's lazy and bad, but keep it simple, stupid. We did a lot. So we thought, let's squeeze everything in here, right? We had this, if you speak to any public defender, they tell you that a lot of these small crimes where you get pulled over for weed or something like that, they're pretextual stops. So they tell you that their clients go into the system on what begins as a pretextual stop, something like window tinting, right? So we included in this initiative that for a police officer to pull you over for a pretextual stop like window tinting, they had to know for sure that your tinting was too dark. Now, how do police officers measure window tinting? They have to go and put something on it. So, we were cheeky in the sense that we knew the technology didn't yet exist for police officers to know for sure that your window tinting was too dark just by driving. So we were trying to really cut the avenues for stupid arrests, for arrests for these pretextual stops that lead to people's lives being ruined. We put too much in there, which led to some of our downfall, we believe. The devil's in the details. So, example, the MOU. Border Patrol does this thing in the city, which some of you may know about. They actually pull you over for traffic violations. It happens. They pull you over not because they want to give you a traffic stop ticket, but because they think you're undocumented. That's what happens. They pull you over for a traffic violation, going too fast, going slow is the thing that we know happens. I'm part of the rapid response team here too. I was one of the people who helped build it. That's a hotline that you call when you're undocumented and being pulled over by ICE, Border Patrol, or the police. So we know. So what we added to try to get rid of that was that Tucson police had to, if they were working with federal agencies on anything, the federal agency had to write an agreement, an MOU, that they would not do traffic stops within city limits. We wrote it too broadly because we thought we had to. And broadly, just in that. And what the opposition took with that is that no federal agency would dare sign an MOU saying that they wouldn't do traffic stops within the city, which meant that then the Tucson police wouldn't have access to the crime database, that, drug busts were going to be no more, that we were going to have all of this, trafficking happening. It was the end all for this because of this MOU provision that we decided to write in. So be very, very careful. Obviously, you all know, our lawyers or will be like, you've got to be very careful about how you write this. And we wrote it, filed it, and then we sat down with the city attorney to discuss his concerns. So we should have done the opposite of that. We should have sat down with them first, seen, their concerns, and then taken it back to our people. There were parts that we were unwilling to change, and that would have remained the case. But some things like this, we could have maybe changed. Anticipate the opposition's messaging. So that provision earlier that I mentioned, that and we had many of our supporters and public folks who were undocumented victims of sexual assault or domestic violence. Many advocates for this were so about this part, but somehow the domestic violence and sexual assault provision was turned by Steve Kasachik in particular, would go to these city meetings and to these talks, and he'd tell them that our provision would actually protect perpetrators of domestic violence and sexual assault, which it did not. But it's difficult to explain these little details to folks. And of course, money talks, another awful cliche. We knew that we needed money, and that money does the job. And with their $500,000, you all might remember, they were sharing videos, the saddest, most terrifying videos of what would happen if we passed Sanctuary City. It was awful. And we didn't have any money to combat any of that, unfortunately. We had to rely on good old-fashioned people power, knocking on doors and the like. And what we're working on now on the expanding sanctuary for PDI is we're building a Tucson Tenants Union. We just had our very, very, very first historic win. We wrote a proposal to get eviction defense for all tenants going through evictions in Pima County. So we got $2 million in, which they're starting an office for it. our biggest step now is to make sure that all of those services are available to all people, including undocumented people. We were key in ending Operation Stone Garden last year, which ended the grant that PIMA, that local police and sheriff's departments get to collaborate directly with Border Patrol and ICE. We ended that. We were the first county to take it, to turn it down. That was years of fighting against it. And just this year, Tucson police also turned down Operation Stone Garden money, and we believe this is a direct result of our campaign. We were key in rescinding Ordinance 11746. That was the record the police here in Tucson ordinance, which isn't necessarily that, but it's what it was called. We continue to fight against ending the criminalization of houselessness in Pima County, especially feeding houseless community members and the like. And of course, since 2020, we've been very focused on mutual aid. One of our biggest programs is Feeding Those Who Feed Us. A lot of our community lost their jobs. So at some point in time, we had 7 days a week, we were working with restaurants and food trucks here in Tucson to provide free cooked meal to anybody who came. We were also providing fresh groceries for refugees, 8 refugee families, on top of using a lot of that cash to do direct food services to undocumented families who were out of work suddenly, to help them pay for their rent and to make sure that they were safely in their homes and eating and healthy. So that is it. Hope I am under time.
Yeah, that's perfect timing. Thank you so much.
Great.
And so I think we'll go ahead and open it up for questions at this point. And I don't see anything in the chat, so I can go ahead and start off if that's okay with you. I first want to just thank you for sharing your story and your insights, particularly because as law students, I think there are things that really get lost, right? When we're like reading these opinions written by people who largely could not be more removed from like the experience of undocumented people in Arizona. And so I guess I wonder if you could speak to how you or effective collaboration between the legal community and grassroots organizers, and how we can kind of work together to advance policies that I think we don't always talk about in law school, like, right, are just not in the conversation in the legal world.
Mm-hmm. I'm not exactly sure. I think, things like this are really valuable. Always, at least I can say that one of the key factors to, I think, this kind of policy is always having directly affected people in the room. It's key. It's key. That's the only way we're going to get this done and get this right. And I think, with that, just more community engagement, more just conversations like this. And if folks are working on this kind of policy, being extremely intentional on centering those that are directly affected. I'll give you an example. We are PDIs working with another, we help write the Tucson 5 for 15 policy. And we're collecting signatures for it now. And one of the things that I'm fighting diligently with in the coalition is that we have people that make minimum wage at the table, right? We are not speaking for the voiceless. These people have their own voices and they can speak for themselves. So always centering that and being super, super intentional about it. I know that then it gets weird into the weeds. How do we bring them in? How do we keep asking folks who are, working for minimum wage 50 hours over here, and then we're asking them to come and give us their opinion on certain things? Then we have to start talking about paying folks for their shared and lived experiences, and that goes down a rabbit hole. But these are things that as a director of this organization that does these things, I myself am asking myself those questions. And I did ask myself those questions with the Sanctuary City Initiative, where I was asking undocumented youth. I was asking undocumented victims of domestic violence to come and share their story, but I didn't have anything to give them in return. So moving forward from that experience, we will do it differently next time, and we will do it better. I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it definitely does. I appreciate it. Professor Desai, I think you're the next one.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. And thanks, Zaira, for being here with us. We're just really grateful that you came and gave this presentation. And I want to apologize, I came late. I had a presentation that ran long, and I'm going to have to leave in a few minutes because I have another presentation I have to zoom into. It's busy in April. But my question has to do with, it's something you alluded to in the beginning. So you said, we wrote this very carefully, looking at the TPD order and making sure that there's not conflict. And I'm assuming you did that because of Arizona's preemption statute. And I'm sure that when you spoke with the city attorney, that was probably his biggest concern, because that statute, which I have looked at very closely, is really scary to cities, right, or counties or towns that want to try to enact something that might come close to conflicting with the state statute. It permits the attorney general to take away all state shared revenue funding, which is a huge threat to a city like Tucson. I think that would have completely wiped out the entire budget or something to that extent. So my question is kind of two parts. One, how much do you think that preemption statute fear played into the defeat of the ordinance? And moving forward, what strategies have you thought about and maybe would be implementing so that you don't come close to having that problem with the preemption statute? Or maybe you want to have a head-on battle with that statute because it hasn't been, so much of that statute hasn't been litigated yet. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for asking that, because I left that out. 1487, I will go to my deathbed just screaming about this stupid preemption bill. My God. I think as far as the general public, I don't think it scared them too much. I think that was more of an internal, Steve K and the likes of everybody else. 1487, they were very worried about it. But as you mentioned, and from what I recall, it's never been used. And then there was also questions about whether it could be used against a citizen-led initiative, because from what I remember about 1487 is that it was a policy that local elected, so the city of Tucson would have to pass themselves for 1487 to apply. We were very intentional about our initiative not crossing the boundaries, not of the TPD orders, because those are just orders, but of SB 1070. But we were also confident that because if we were to pass, we're a citizen-led initiative, and in Arizona, the founders of Arizona had one good idea. One was a deep general distrust of government. So they gave us the right to, when government isn't doing their job, that we as citizens can say, screw this, let's collect signatures and let's do it ourselves. And it's incredibly protected. You all remember the Prop 206, the minimum wage of 2016, which I was the Southern Arizona director for that. You all remember we were sued to heaven and back. We were sued over and over and over and over again, and we withstood all of those lawsuits. Why? Because Arizona Constitution protects citizen-led initiatives once they're passed. It protects them very, very much so. So, we were sure that with our initiative, we had went around all the edges, but I will be honest with you, is that we were hoping for a challenge. So the short term and the small eye view of this was that we'd pass sanctuary in Tucson, but what we actually wanted to do was start a fight. We wanted to go to court, we wanted to be challenged, and we were sure that in the end, it would be, we are legal, our initiative is legal and it's right and it's protected by the US Constitution, and SB 1070 isn't. We wanted to have SB 1070 thrown out. As far as 1487, you know, we were sure that we weren't going to have revenue taken away, but, you know, it's still a threat. As far as future policies, we don't know if we'll ever do this again on any level. I mean, we're doing it with the minimum wage campaign, but at least with this, we had a good example, the one in Flagstaff that was passed a couple of years ago. And we used that. We learned the lessons that they learned from it, made certain exceptions, changed it a little bit. We are very confident that 1487 is not going to apply to this at all, but definitely in the future, if we ever do anything like the Sanctuary City Initiative again, that'll be front and center. And then also to say that I myself and PDI is part of a large coalition in Arizona that is doing a lot of preemption work, and preemption is a huge part. It's a central part of a lot of the work being done in Phoenix and in Tucson as far as policy.
Thank you very much. And I'm sorry I have to leave now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget, you've had your hand up for a few minutes.
Hi there. Thank you so much. This is amazing. I am a huge fangirl of yours. So this is fantastic. And I think much needed in this law school space. My question, I think an obsessive amount of energy is spent trying to understand how the other side can hold the opinions they do, especially after the past 4 years, or like what it will take for them to wake up and feel some empathy. But I noticed you talked about organizing your community multiple times. So I'm wondering strategically, do you think it's more productive to focus on mobilizing community that's already more aligned with you than to try to like radically reach across the aisle? I feel like I've just heard thousands of conversations the past few years about like, how can we like get people to care? And I'm wondering how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think not. I think the majority of people are not on one side or the other. I think the majority of people are in the center. The majority of people don't vote, right? Large majority of people don't vote. Large majority of people are too broke and tired and sick to even pay attention to any of this stuff. The large majority of people, I think, just want to be left alone. They want to work, they want to take care of their children, and they want to survive. And so I think those are the people that we need to focus on. That's the community that I'm talking about, right? When I went to knock on the doors of the neighborhood where I grew up and where I ran the streets with my brother, where I expected folks to just go, oh, of course, yeah, let me sign this, or let me vote for this. Those are the conversations that were the most impactful for me, because they weren't really sure. They didn't really know what these terms meant. And those are the people that you can move. Those are the people that you can say, I'm from here. Here's what this means. This is what it would mean for you. And if you go to the south side of Tucson and you talk to anybody about being pulled over for being brown, everybody has done it. I mean, when SB 1070 was passed, I remember being in spaces with my family where one of my tios or cousins were going to go to Phoenix, and immediately another family member would say, make sure you drive the speed limit, make sure you don't get pulled over by Arpaio's people, right? I mean, like, we know racial profiling. The sheriff's department had a ton of, they didn't even have a racial profiling policy before we made them write one 2 years ago. They didn't have one, which is shocking. So you can talk about these things with folks who experience it. And I think, I think there's a lot of time and energy wasted on reaching across the aisle. It keeps us moving towards that end of the spectrum. It keeps us going that way. And I think, it is my deep belief that we've gotta be very I hate to keep using this word, but we've got to be very intentional and also brave about talking about things in their true nature and calling them by their true name. And that's hard to do when you're reaching across the aisle to folks who believe that family separation is a good thing. It's not anything that we spend our time on, and we don't believe that it's worth the time. I believe too that they're a minority of the folks out there. They truly are. It's not our job at PDI. We don't focus on it. Somebody might disagree, and other organizations that might be their focus, and that's, that's their right to focus on that. On a grassroots here in Tucson, I don't believe that it's worth our time.
Thank you.
Professor Marcus.
Hi. First, I want to thank you. Others have thanked you, but I want to say your talk was so informative. Your slides have so much packed in there. And as a person who teaches in the clinical program, I want to thank you for modeling reflection. You guys went back, or at least you did, but I have a feeling the group did, and talk about like, what are our lessons from this experience moving on? So that's all awesome. And my question has to do with assuming, and I don't know if this is a correct assumption, that you have and try to build a diverse coalition. I mean, you are talking about intersectionality, people from different backgrounds in your group, right?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of ground rules do you have for your conversations? Because some of the, I'm sure many of your conversations and the issues are controversial, there's heated discussions, and how do you
We have what we call community rules, which are very basic. One person speak at a time. Don't yuck my yum, meaning like, don't be rude about something that I said. We allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to have discussions. We did cheat a little bit because most of the people all of the people that are in this coalition agree on most things. We disagree on some of the logistical parts, on the next steps, right? On certain things, but the way that PDI works is that we work in a consensus model. So we don't leave that room and we don't say yes or no unless everybody is either on board and that's it. With those rules, I will tell you that as a growing organization, it's not perfected. We have had problems. We've had to go back and revisit these rules. We've had to go back and make sure that our space isn't being overtaken by men, white men in particular. We want to make sure that those that are speaking, again, those that are speaking the most are those that are directly affected. So these are things that as a leader, or even as, say, if you're the facilitator of our meetings, you have to really pay attention. And it's a art form to get folks who normally don't speak in a setting but should be speaking. We should be hearing what they have to say, getting them out of their shell and making sure that they get in, that they get ownership, and that we understand their perspective on a certain issue. And we learn so much all the time. I hope I'm not getting off topic, but that was your conversation. That was your question. Community rules. So these rules, you come up together, you come up with community rules together, you all agree on them. And at the beginning of every meeting that you have them posted, you remind everybody what the community rules are. We all agree to them. And if those community rules are broken, then we go back and start having conversations about accountability, and if harm was done, how we move forward with that. it's always complicated work. It's never easy and it's always ugly, but it's a way to do it. It's how we do it.
I have another quick question. I was wondering, I know you mentioned the sort of progressive infrastructure in Tucson not matching, what Phoenix has, and I wonder if you see that changing and progressing, especially since you all became an organization and as attacks have continued on immigrant communities.
I mean, I think so. Out of the Sanctuary City Initiative, we came out with hundreds of volunteers. We gathered so many thousands of signatures, mostly by just volunteer work. It was wild. And these are folks who normally would have never voted in a local election. These are people, PDN is a radical group. We have a lot of radical followers, folks that don't necessarily vote. And here we were asking folks to vote and to lay their trust on this electoral system that so many of us have a deep distrust in. So yeah, we came out of that with these amazing folks, many of whom have become leaders, many of whom have now worked on campaigns, who have gotten other people elected. One of our organizers who started as a volunteer was, the head of Gabriela Cáceres Kelly's campaign, right? And now they're doing all this, amazing stuff. So yeah, it's blossomed, and so many folks who were part of that and at the center of the campaign are now out there doing these really amazing things. So it's definitely helped. And that base building that we did and that trust building that we did with our community is now helping us with the minimum wage campaign. They remember People's Defense Initiative. They recall the conversations that we're having. We're going to go back to the same people that we had conversations with and talk about this initiative. So I think, yeah. And in between, right, last year when we didn't have anything going on, we were texting the same base about housing and about how housing is a human right and about how they've got rights. And so we're building in between too, because the last thing that we ever want to be or become is that, exchangeable thing where you're just exchanging things, transactional, there we go, a transaction, which is what electoralism is. You show up, you tell them that everything's going to go up in flames if they don't vote for you. And then boom, you drop them and you never come back and you never do anything that you promised them that you do. We need to build with our community in between. And that includes mutual aid systems, that includes conversations, that includes listening sessions, that includes resource sharing and all sorts of other things.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, Professor Marcus, do you want to ask yours? I just noticed it in the chat.
Oh, my question is just about the degree to which your group gets involved with lobbying for change on the national level, and like immigration reform.
Mm-hmm. No, not too much yet. We're very focused on local politics, super focused in Tucson. We're very proud to be Tucson based. We are, however, part of a large national coalition called Homes for All, now that we're working so hard on housing issues, which happens to be the intersectional issue for almost everything, right? We are part of a national group. We are part of a national strategy group where we are, on that scale lobbying and pushing for policies. Largely in regard to the moratoriums, largely in regard to aid and how it should be used. But that's as far as we're getting with national policy, maybe in the future, but not at this moment. And we don't partake in any, we don't endorse candidates. We don't get involved in telling people how to vote or who to vote for, even though it's obviously, clear that we encourage folks to take part in the electoral politics.
Does anyone have any last questions? We probably have time for one more. But if not, I just want to
I
say,
have a question. Why not on that last one? Why, yeah, why not?
Why not? Why don't we endorse candidates? Well, one, we as an organization have not yet worked out the structure and the procedure as to what that would look like. That's number one. We don't have the process for it yet. But two, we are super proud and super about being an organization that's about issues. And we have a deep, deep distrust of elected officials. We really do. And I can tell you that it was a hurtful thing for us to not say, endorse somebody like Gabriela Caceres Kelly, whom we all adore and love. And, you know, she'd be like the perfect candidate to endorse, but we didn't endorse her. Because we think it's really important for an organization to retain their autonomy. And we have to be able to challenge folks. And we have to be able to challenge folks who say they're on our side constantly, who almost always let you down. So we want to make sure that we keep our autonomy, that we keep our focus on issues, and that we are the organization that can and will keep them accountable if ever we need to do that. But we have a very clear belief that it's not about holding elected officials accountable or pushing them on anything. We don't do that. We organize on issues, we build a movement, and they will come. Elected officials will always come once you build with your community, once you change the conversation, and once you start making a fuss. They follow. There's no need to push them anywhere or to call them or no. If we're doing our job on the ground and we're mobilizing our community and we're strengthening with each other and we're teaching theory to our folks, we will build the ground for the actual change that will happen. Change, we believe, only comes from the ground up, never from the top down. So it's just against really our philosophy of being.
well, that seems like a great note to end on, and it's convenient because we're about at time. So thank you to everyone for being here, and a special thank you to you, Zaira, for sharing your work with us, and for the work that you do in our community. We're really grateful for it.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. This is terrific. And sure, good luck in her recovery. I don't think